Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session here on intercultural presentation skills, public speaking on the global stage. And as our world becomes more interrelated, and this is going to be a skill that all of us are going to have to learn. And I think it really helps us to develop those culturally sensitive skills, even when we're dealing with people in our own hometowns. We have two very distinguished panelists joining us today, Dan Bullock and Raul Sanchez. Dan is a language and communication specialist, and he's with the United Nations headquarters and also New York University. And Raul is a clinical assistant professor with New York University. And we're going to talk about how to prepare ourselves to present to an international audience. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Raul and Dan and ask you to put your questions in the Q&A. You can also use the chat if you want, and we will let our presenters go. Dan.
Okay, so thanks so much, Tom. We really appreciate the introduction. And there's my colleague, he's joining in as well, Professor Sanchez. So I'm going to turn it over to you first, Professor Sanchez.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you for having us. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Isaiah, and of course, NAGC Communication School Conference for having us here. We're very excited to be here. As we know, this is the globalized era, and so presentation skills are more important now than ever. We are all in multicultural teams and global teams, and we are not only looking to communicate effectively with those teams, but connect effectively with those teams. So I'm very excited to share a little bit of this today in terms of the tips that we present at our corporate trainings and in our seminars at NYU and at the United Nations. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, I am a clinical assistant professor at New York University, so full-time faculty, and I also, part of my role is coordinating our corporate education program, so trainings between multinational corporations and NYU. And some of the clients that I've worked with are Bloomberg and Deloitte and Touche. I've also done trainings at the United Nations. And we've also recently, Professor Bullock and I, Dan and I, have co-authored a book called How to Communicate Effectively with Anyone, Anywhere. So the reason we put this globe on here, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, is that the book centers on global communication skills. So the idea is that an astronaut's viewpoint of the Earth is a profound cognitive shift, and that is said to lead to world peace and sustainability and, of course, progress. And so our book is bringing that mindset to our communication skills on the planet. You know, how do we see patterns of communication and then navigate those as a global communicator? So each chapter covers a different skill, and one of those chapters covers presentation skills in the global context. So we're going to be sharing a snapshot of those tips today. And then I'm very pleased and excited to present with this gentleman over here, Professor Dan Bullock.
Okay, well, thank you, Professor Sanchez. So hi, everyone. So my name is Dan Bullock. So I'm a language and communication specialist at the United Nations Secretariat up here in New York City, where I train a number of diplomats, delegates, and global UN staff in higher order communication skills. So public speaking being one of those. It also treads the line of negotiation skills and some other elements like that. I am also a faculty member at New York University's School of Professional Studies within the Division of Programs of Business, where I specialize in public relations and corporate communications, right? So marketing, media relations, things like that. Professor Sanchez and I also contribute to such publications as Harvard Business Review, the Wall Street Journal, business.com, and a few other ones as well, in addition to that book that he previously mentioned as well. So that's a little bit about us. We're ready to dive in. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about intercultural presentation skills, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Everybody ready?
There we go.
So, okay, let's go.
Okay, so topical agenda. So part one. Okay, so part one is culturally powerful presentations. So we live in this globalized market today, right? We have to be able to communicate effectively to essentially become what, like a global communicator. And even if we are within our separate markets or within our separate regional areas, right, more than likely you're working with diverse populations, right? Or you will be soon, right? So we're going to talk about characteristics of an effective presentation. So what really stands out? What do you need to be aware of? Because let's just remind ourselves, public speaking is the number one fear, right? It's been like that for a while. A lot of people don't like to public speak, right? But the idea is once you figure out this mind shift, and that's what we're here to talk to you about, a topic in our book, right? Is the storytelling factor, right? We're going to talk a little bit about this, the science of the neural impact. So we're just going to give you a little bit of science to back up what's being said, but also the idea is to alleviate any anxiety you have about public speaking, right? It works. Okay, so, and then we'll talk a little bit about Maslow's motivational theory. Now, we're all pretty familiar with the pyramid, Maslow's pyramid. We're going to talk about that in the context of presentations, right? And then audience considerations. The fourth bullet is opening the presentation. So you have to gain the audience's attention from the very start, right? You have to have something that perhaps maybe promotes curiosity, something along those lines. And we're going to give you some kind of components with that. Then part two, Professor Sanchez.
And then part two, we're going to widen it. Sure. Thanks, Dan. So we're going to widen it to the global context. And again, as we're talking about, we're in the globalized era here. And so we're expanding the context to something called schemata, which is very important. If you don't know what schemata is, don't worry, it is coming, and stay tuned. This is a cognitive strategy that is quite powerful with intercultural presentations. Then we're going to touch on the larger cultural style patterns. So as Professor Bullock mentioned, how do we navigate these as a global communicator and develop what is called an international presentation style or a global presentation style? We're going to touch on some linguistic considerations of the global communicator, because our background is in linguistics, psycholinguistics, so the areas where language intersects with thought and perception. And then we're going to end with one vision and a very special treat on the last slide there. So
okay.
We hope you're ready to dive in. We've got a lot to cover. The session is very interactive. We have a lot of points where we're going to ask you questions, so please participate as much as you can. Please enter information in the appropriate chat box on the platform, and then let us know your thoughts and your answers along the way, because we want this to be as interactive as possible. We want to hear as much from you as you're hearing from us. So to begin, as we mentioned, we're in the globalized era. We have multicultural teams to motivate, global partners to collaborate with, and all have diverse needs and communication styles. But the idea is not just focusing on one style for one particular audience, but a mix of styles, developing an international presentation style. So every presentation is an opportunity to change the world, right? Whether you're presenting to a small group of coworkers, stakeholders, or a larger audience at a conference, every presentation has a goal of creating a connection between presenter and audience that brings about some kind of lasting change. So we wanted to start with this quote by our former president, Barack Obama: "Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the change that we seek," right? We wanted to start with this word change, with this concept of change, because it's very important for the framework for intercultural presentations. And we want to ask you a question. What is a catalyst? So you're familiar with this term, perhaps from chemistry, but can anyone out there define what a catalyst is? Perhaps you can enter this in the chat.
Or maybe even think about it as well, because I know we're using the Whova platform, okay?
Right, so we're experimenting a bit, so maybe we'll see if, and Tom, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but has anyone typed in what a catalyst is? Maybe we'll get one response just to see if
nobody yet.
They're out there. Okay, so I know you're out there. Please tell us what a catalyst is. What does a catalyst do? What do they do in a chemical reaction?
Well, I can tell you it speeds it up. So somebody
Yes.
said something that makes things click and move things along.
Right, excellent, fantastic. So exactly that. So a catalyst speeds up the chemical reaction, right? And so as presenters, we are also catalysts. So we are not the source. When we're thinking about intercultural presentations, we're not the source of change, we're the catalyst of change. And the reason for this framework is that we are not the hero, right? The audience is the hero of the presentation. We are simply the guy on the side with the water as the audience member is running along the marathon race. We are Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid, or the fairy godmother. We are not the hero. We are simply the guide on the side. We are the catalyst. And the reason for this framework is that once you see yourself as the catalyst, the audience becomes the centerpiece of the presentation. And this is what leads to adaptability, right? This cultivates an adaptive approach where you create an interactive presentation space of deeper understanding, respect, and empathy with audiences, because then you're sharing ideas in service to others, right? No longer are you the focus, the audience is the focus, and then everything you do is to adjust and adapt to meet that communication goal. And there's 3 areas here. You're a catalyst for thought, emotion, and action. So the goal is that the audience members leave the room thinking differently, feeling differently, or doing something differently after the presentation. But this idea of the catalyst is very important for the framework in terms of adaptability. It shifts the entire presentation context. It's a very important mindset shift. And then now we're going to ask you a question, and we want you to think about a powerful, effective presentation that you've seen in the past, perhaps at the conference, perhaps in another venue, and tell us what are the characteristics of that presentation. What made that particular presentation so impactful and so powerful?
I'm looking now in the chat. I know for me, it's simplicity.
Mm-hmm. Good, simplicity, yeah, excellent.
Short and simple.
Short
storytelling.
Storytelling. Mm-hmm.
Personal, emotional connection.
Yeah, good.
Authenticity.
Yes, very important. Authenticity, yeah, personal connection, storytelling.
Relatable.
Great.
Okay, very good. We'll see if
engagement and depth.
Engagement and depth, very important, yes.
Yeah.
Engagement.
Will says kiss. Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. Yes.
So I don't know if
the first time I heard that, I said, well, I guess if you want to engage the audiences, yes, no, absolutely. Yeah, keep it simple. That's an easy way to remember. Very good. So, and we have some here, so we're going to reveal them here. We have them behind these blue blocks, but we wanted to also elicit a bit and see how you frame them. So yes, in turn, we have information and research. Of course, the purpose is important. Visual aids in here, thinking about type, design, clarity, and relevance, organization, structure, and the message. Again, those three areas of call to action, feeling, or thought. And then on the other side here, we also have nonverbals, right? Eye contact, body language. In terms of intercultural presentation skills, one of the most fundamental tips for nonverbals is that you shift your body when you are shifting in topic. Okay, so for example, if I say, today I'm going to talk about topic A, and then go through a few things and then talk about topic B. Now, in terms of A, let's examine this point, okay? If I did the same thing and I said, today I'm going to talk about topic A and go through a few things and then talk about topic B. But in terms of topic A, okay, so you can see the difference, right? In terms of an international audience, you want to shift your body when you're shifting between topics to mark those sections in the presentation, okay? Voice quality, very important. Stress, which is volume, intonation is going up and down in rhythm. Very important in the communicative aspect. Passion, of course, you mentioned, a lot of you mentioned engagement. I know Tom mentioned that as well. When you're passionate about a topic, you tend to bring that audience along in the journey. Transition signals, again, marking sections in the presentation so the audience members can easily follow. And then use of the virtual space, you know, whether it is with your body language, with a PowerPoint, with a breakout activity, all of that leads to that interactive element where you also get feedback from the audience to see if the comprehension is occurring and also the engagement. And there's one last thing, technical level of talk, whether the vocabulary is elevated or whether you are using more generalized language. If you're presenting to a generalist audience, that's also very important. And interactivity, we mentioned a bit. So there's a reason why we put these in these two columns. And the reason is that there are two pillars essentially to any international presentation. One is the left side, which is content, and the other is delivery, which is the right side, okay? These pillars are mutually reinforcing. If one of them falls, the other one falls with it, okay? We tend to think of content the most when preparing a presentation. We think the PowerPoint is the end goal. We finish the PowerPoint, the presentation preparation stage is over. But in fact, there's a whole host of other things we have to think about when presenting interculturally, and that is the delivery stage. How do we deliver the information most effectively? We have the content, now how can we deliver it in a way that is impactful and also relatable and relevant? And so there's a quote here on the left, on the bottom, that I wanted to point out to you. Research in cognitive psychology suggests that memory is affected by how deeply we process new knowledge. And the idea here is that emotions embed memories more strongly. So, you know, we have to spend as much time preparing the delivery as we would the content. And then Professor Bull.
Sure. And then just another point just to bring up, and maybe think about it this way, because we tend to think a lot about questions, right? So what we say is as important as how we say it. So the what being the content part, right? How we do it, the delivery, is just as important. So both have to go together, like Professor Sanchez has been saying. You can't really have one without the other. It doesn't stop just because you finished an amazing PowerPoint. You have to figure out and plan on how to deliver it is the next step, okay?
Right. Exactly. And so Now we're going to go into a little science that Professor Bullock mentioned at the beginning, because we're nerds and we enjoy the science aspect of it. So in terms of neuroscience, there's a team of researchers at Princeton University led by Dr. Yuri Hassan, and they wanted to research the neurological basis of human communication and storytelling. And what they found was remarkable. They found that when we hear a powerful story, we share nearly identical brain waves with the speaker. Okay, so when we are delivering a powerful story, we share nearly identical brain waves with the audience. And this is similar to the way mirror neurons work. And what this research shows is something remarkable that we feel we've known intuitively for quite some time, is that the most powerful transcultural presentation ingredient is storytelling, which you mentioned earlier. And we have a shared human experience. And so what they did, these researchers, is they analyzed the brain scans of storytellers and audiences and hooked them up to MRI machines. And they found that our brains essentially get in sync with one another through this act of storytelling. And this effect is called neural coupling. And so what is important about this is, we want to create this effect. We want to create this neural coupling effect in our presentations interculturally. Storytelling synchronizes the listener presenter's brain. Also, it is something that, if we go to the next point there, you are able to connect emotionally to the audience members, as you mentioned before, and emotions embed memories more strongly. And also more areas of the brain light up than factual reporting. So MRI studies show that storytelling causes additional areas of the brain to light up, and the brain responds to story events almost as if they were actually happening to the listener. And again, we get to that benefit of enhancing memory. So how do we create this mind-to-mind connection? How do we create this neural coupling effect? So there's a few techniques here that we tend to present in our trainings, and we do trainings at the United Nations, at NYU, and multinational corporations. The first is you can bond with your audience over a professional, social, and personal cause. So all of us listen to our stories with our hearts more than our minds, because we look for messages that align with our values. So think of a core value of your presentation. Maybe it's honesty or integrity or empathy, and then build your story around that. And then how can you expand stories from personal to human experience? This is the way to approach this one. The next one, illustrating a skill, method, or process. So instead of delivering rote steps, see if a story can illustrate the process that you're presenting, and the story will make that process easier to remember and understand. The third is to make a presentation bigger, highlight a shared challenge or overcome a common goal. So see if you can find a common goal in your presentation that the audience will share. And one way to do this with a story is to think of a powerful decision-making moment in your life. And then see if by telling that story, the audience can be inspired to make that same decision in their lives, okay? The next one is to make a presentation bigger in meaning than its data. In governmental work, a lot of data that we're working with, a lot of data that we're presenting. Professor Bullock shared an article with me that I never forgot, the title. The title was "Data Without the Human Soul is Meaningless." And this is very true. Without the human soul, right, without the human mind, data is meaningless. It's just numbers, right? But once we're there, we give it analysis, we give it insight. We also are able to extract trends from that data and tell a story around the data. So if you can use a story to present data, it's going to be much more impactful. Mm-hmm. And finally, if you want to share your passion with your audience, conveying passion, you can ignite the audience interest in the process. Professor Bullock.
Great. Yeah, so thank you so much, Professor Sanchez. So whether you're in the conference room, right, or the boardroom, the virtual room, so these are our metaphorical campfires, right? This is where we have to capture the attention, whether we're sharing data or sharing some piece of information, we have to make it exciting. We have to engage with somebody, like Professor Sanchez was saying. This brings us to this next point. So engaging global audiences using, or rather looking at it from Maslow's motivational theory. Just one quick thing I want to point out is there are 4 communication elements involved in any form of communication. It doesn't matter what it is, right? Number one, and we may have heard this a lot before, but you have to know your audience. It's so important, right? Because if you don't know your audience, right, then the message may not resonate as much as it should, right? And interculturally, sometimes that can be difficult, right? As we continue through the slides, you'll see how to identify the audience, right? Number two is you have to be able to understand, well, what is the purpose? What is the overall objective that I'm trying to deliver with the presentation or give in a speech, right? Is it to inform? Is it to persuade? Is it to entertain, or is it a combination of those, right? Number three is, well, that's going to help inform and shape your message, right? The message is so important, right? And having a good grasp of what that is, right, is going to be just as important as the other two steps. But ultimately, down here, I'm going to put this one very big. Something we've been talking about is value, right? You have to make it valuable to the other party. If they don't see any value in whatever it is that you're saying, well, then guess what? They're probably going to start thinking about something else, right? You're not going to make that connection. It's almost like a missed opportunity whenever the whole idea is to collaborate and connect information, right? It's more than just communicating today. It's more about connecting with the audience, if you want to think about it in that kind of framework. Now, just to get into the components of Maslow's motivational theory, we want you to internalize this question. In what ways can a speaker hold the audience's attention? Just keep that in mind as we continue to go through this, okay? These 5 levels motivate your audience to learn from your presentation, okay? So just thinking about the elements and stages, we can look at the bottom rung, right? Or the bottom tier it starts with your basic interest and your basic needs. We have to figure out a way to connect with the audience, right? Whatever that curious element is. Now, one way to do this is we need to be thinking on how we're going to relate to the audience specifically, whether it's to their concerns or maybe it's their interests, right? And based off of linguistics, like there's patterns that exist, right? There's patterns that exist. We really don't give it a lot of attention, but if you think about it, a lot of the time we have a problem statement or we have a problem and we're there to give the solution, right? Or maybe it's a cause of something and we're there to give an effect, right? So see how there's this dynamic, or maybe it's a comparison and then we want to contrast something, right? So there's patterns that exist. It's just we really don't think about them like that because we're very concerned on the content or maybe the way that we sound or whatever the case is. But that's where it starts, getting the attention of the audience, which we'll talk about more in a moment. The next stage is building this community, right? Like this, this safety or comfort level with the audience. Okay, so a safe environment to where people feel like they could share and really show what it is that's on their mind. So for example, you are always in service to the audience. It doesn't matter what it is that you're presenting, you're there for them. Okay. And like Professor Sanchez said, you are the fairy godmother. You are Mr. Miyagi from Karate Kid, if you want to take a pop culture element. And granted, right, you just have to think of things this way. Yoda, for example, right? But the idea is that you want to show the global audience you understand and recognize their preferences for information, because we each have different, I guess, modes or different ways in terms of how we prefer information to be given to us. And a lot of it comes down to cultural aesthetic, right? These cultural nuances, because if you think about it, going through grade school all the way up to university and into our careers, we've been giving the information the same way, depending on what culture we come from, right? High context cultures versus low context cultures is a big part of it, and we'll explain that in a moment. But the whole idea is that you're including diverse cultural references within your presentation, because you're trying to maximize or optimize the largest amount of people, right? Welcoming them into your presentation so they see value in it, okay? The next tier we have here is the community aspect. So this is more about building belonging. So now that there's a safe environment, so now we're really starting to build a community. We want to really start to spark feedback loops if we can, right? We want to also what's called chunk information, right? Because we typically now, whenever we say chunk information, we talk in smaller chunks, right? If you really break it down and analyze it, speeches and other elements, they're not very, very long sentences. So the idea is that chunking information so that it's more along the lines of micro content, instead of giving somebody a big piece of information and having them figure it out. Also, speaking interculturally is global English, right? So many of us work in government communications, right? And I know at the United Nations, we do the same thing. We might have heard the words plain English or the collocation plain English, right? Now, that's a big part of it, right? where we're not really using a lot of idioms and so on. Professor Sanchez will talk about that here in a moment, but also this concept of global English, okay? So keep that in mind. But the whole idea is we're trying to build relationships through story and allowing contributors to speak up, right? To share and solve or come to some solution together, okay? The next tier is this thankfulness, right? This gratitude aspect, okay? And within this gratitude aspect, we have to just continuously remind ourselves that we are in service to the audience. You are sharing an idea to others, and that's one of the greatest expressions that you can do as a presenter, right? So really with this gratitude, that's your aim. Like Professor Sanchez said at the beginning, it's serving as a catalyst of thought, of emotions or actions, right? Moving into that last tier at the very top, and we made it to the top of the pyramid, is this accomplishment aesthetic, right? This call to action. Well, now what do we want the audience to do? Like they've sat through maybe majority of the presentation, but the idea is we should be motivating them throughout the entire presentation, encouraging them to be thinking differently or processing information in a new way, perhaps. But the idea is every presentation is a collaboration between presenter and audience, right? It must be a collaboration. We are all interconnected through and in service of ideas, right? So think about it of me sharing an idea to you, and maybe you creating this feedback loop, you're sharing information back to me, and we're in this constant ebb and flow of collaboration, okay? And then Professor Sanchez, yeah.
Sure, and I just want to one point. So this is great that we're applying Maslow's motivational theory to presentations, and basically this pyramid is a hierarchy of needs, right? And the most advanced need of humanity is self-actualization. That's when you get to that very top part. And culturally, we tend to think, oh, that means us, right? We have to self-actualize. We have to be the ones fulfilled, and we're presenting, becoming ourselves, being our best self. But in fact, in the intercultural situation, the audience is the one that you want to self-actualize. You are trying to help them become their best selves. Again, as Professor Bullock mentioned, you're Yoda, you're Mr. Miyagi, you are the guide on the side. You want them to self-actualize in everything you do. Even if you're telling stories about yourself, it's not so you can feel fulfilled, it's so you can help the audience make those empowering decisions in their life. So again, that framework, that mindset is very important. It's a mindset shift, but it allows you to develop that adaptability and then that intercultural approach that is very powerful. So now we're going to get into some of the mechanics here. So how do you create a powerful presentation hook interculturally? So we're going back to neuroscience because, as we mentioned, we are nerds and we love this stuff. But in fact, the science does demonstrate that these techniques here that we're about to share with you are very effective. So there's a chemical called dopamine. So we wanted to ask you what exactly dopamine is. We have this in our bodies. And can anyone tell us what that is? What is the function of this chemical dopamine? D-O-P-A-M-I-N-E.
Waiting. Isn't it the pleasure hormone?
Yeah, good. Yeah, excellent. Yes, exactly. So dopamine is, so if you're there, you can feel free to type in the chat. But it is.
Somebody says feel good.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. Yes. So dopamine, it's the chemical reward, the brain's chemical reward for curiosity. Okay. And the idea is that when we become curious, our brains trigger this release of this pleasure chemical. But the most interesting thing about this research, and most recently it was at the University of California, Berkeley, is that we don't get this natural high when we're receiving information, but we're anticipating the reward of information. So the pleasure we feel in the state of curiosity is not derived from the actual reward itself, the information, but the anticipation of that information. So this is very important. And this means that what we can do is create hooks, not just at the beginning of a presentation, but before each section in our presentation to keep the audience engaged throughout. And there's a few techniques here we're going to give you. And then we're going to do a little interactive exercise to test your knowledge. And Professor Bullock?
Sure. Okay. So this first one we have is an interesting observation. So you want to think about this more along the lines of sharing some sort of an opinion. I mean, that's what an observation is, right? Because it's debatable, it's arguable. What if we said something like this? American economists aren't sleeping well these days. I'm getting you to think something already. Like I'm purposely structuring this, right, to get you thinking probably the word right? Or the question, well, why? Why? Well, tell me, is there something wrong, right? I'm trying to get you to feel a certain way, right? American economists are not sleeping well these days. Well, tell me more. That's the whole idea, is to, that's the essence of this hook, is to provoke some sort of curiosity. Okay.
Right.
Professor
And
Sanchez.
sure. And so, and then with observation hook, the idea is that the strategies that you're pointing out an irregularity, a pattern or discovery, or a warning. That's how you can create that type of hook. And then for this one, so Professor Bullock, do you want to do this one?
Sure. Okay. So a story and unique scenario. Okay. What if I started with a presentation, right? And I said this afternoon when I reached for my credit card to give to the clerk, I hesitated. Identity theft is one of the fastest growing crimes today. But you see how just that one sentence prior to the main topic, and the main topic here is identity theft. If I started off with just saying identity theft is one of the fastest growing crimes today, okay, well, maybe that might interest some people, but you have to create context around it, right? We are hardwired for stories. So give them stories, give the audience stories or a unique scenario, an anecdote of some sort. And it doesn't have to be long, as you see right here. Okay. Professor Sanchez?
Sure. And the third is to create a question. And so let's say I asked you, can you imagine the world without a single tree? Okay. So this is quite powerful, right? Now, if I had talked to you about forest degradation or climate change or, you know, forests are being cleared out because of urbanization and all these other things, greenhouse gases, okay, I would have had you probably sitting there like this, okay? But the question is quite powerful. And I'm going to tell you a story so I could illustrate this technique here. It goes beyond the rhetorical question. There was a presentation seminar that I was giving. And so at the seminar, I was in the audience member. I was an audience member with the other trainees. And then, you know, this participant, Audrey, was giving a presentation. And she said, I want to ask all of you to please close your eyes. So we closed our eyes. And she said, can you now think of the person that you miss the most? So we did. I was thinking about my mother. Someone else is probably thinking about their father, their grandmother, their cousin, their uncle. And then she said, now open your eyes. And on her first slide, she had a road, and the road was diverging in two directions. And she started to play some music. And she said, today I'm going to talk to you about loss and how it's important to appreciate those we have while they're with us on the planet. And we were all just, you know, tears coming out. I mean, we were feeling this presentation. We were fully engaged. And the beauty of the question hook is that she didn't have to elicit the answers from the audience members, right? You don't have to elicit the answers from the attendees. Just by asking the question, they will automatically connect themselves to your presentation by answering the question in their own mind, right? So the strategy here for the question hook, you can do two types. One can be a yes or no question or a show of hands question. And then this gets the audience to ask, so what, right? The other type could be an open-ended question. And then you're implying that there is a predetermined answer in your presentation. Okay, Professor Bullock?
Sure. Okay, so moving on from questions, and just keep in mind, so many of us are familiar with TED Talks, right? If you go back and you listen to those speeches with TED Talks, more than likely they're using one of these presentation hooks, right? And again, you can apply that to your conference room, your board meetings, your team meetings as well, right? The idea is it's limitless. It's not stopping in one form of a meeting. The next one we want to talk about is an amazing fact, right? Because we love facts, right? Facts. What if I said something like this? What if I said, okay, lung cancer kills 170,000 people, right, in 1 year, more than all criminal and accidental deaths combined. So not only am I giving you a statistic, right, a number, but I'm contrasting it with two other elements, criminal deaths and accidental deaths, right, and the combination of that. That's more profound. People are going to think, okay, wow, like I didn't know that, right? This aha moment starts to kind of come front and center. Now, just another example. So what if I said something like this? What if I said, the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west? It's a fact, right? It's a fact. It's been doing that for who knows how long, right? But the idea is it's just not as interesting because we're desensitized to it, right? So the idea is the word amazing has to fit in there. It has to be something that people are readily not not really familiar with. Okay. And then we have the last one here, which is more of an unofficial one, Professor Sanchez.
Right. Sure. And the last one we just included here for completion's sake. So this is a type of hook, but this is the least recommended. All the other ones are effective. This one is not as effective, and that is beginning with a quote. Okay. So here, just beginning solely with a quote from someone else. We picked one from Henry Ford: "A business that makes nothing but money is a poor business." But the reason you wouldn't start right away with a quote is that these are considered borrowed openings, right? So chances are that when the orator said the quote, they weren't thinking about you or your presentation, right? So what you have to do is then connect the quote to your presentation, and that wastes a valuable time, which is at the most important juncture of the presentation, the beginning, right? So instead of starting with a quote, you want to start with originality, your own words, and then you could immediately put a quote in afterwards to support your idea, to illustrate your idea, but not starting with a quote solely at the beginning, okay? So again, closing this point here, dopamine, this is the pleasure chemical that the brain releases for curiosity. And the idea is you want to build these points throughout the presentation, not just at the beginning, to keep your audience engaged all the way through. So now we want to test your knowledge here, but first we're going to illustrate a technique, and Professor Bullock.
Okay, and just to make sure that you have it, right, because these are some of the presentations that we've been exposed to. So what have I said? This, so what have I said? Engaging in environmental sustainability will help us to reduce the causes of global warming. Okay, it's factual, right? It has some pretty well use of words, right? But or what if we said it like this, Professor Sanchez?
So in the second variation, if global temperatures continue to rise, New York and Mumbai will be underwater by the year 2050. Okay, so this is quite disturbing. Unfortunately, I didn't make this up. This is actually out there in the media and the news. But this is a disturbing statistic. It grabs your attention, okay? The reason we wanted to illustrate this here with these two hooks is that often participants or trainees will ask, well, what about the main idea? If you notice in the second hook, it's the hook that's effective, but I didn't use the words environmental sustainability. I didn't use global warming. So the hook is not the main idea. The hook is simply to catch the interest, and then you lead to the main idea, okay? So now we're gonna go into a little exercise here. This is something we do in our workshops and seminars with professionals to develop these techniques. We have the techniques there in light blue, and we're gonna ask you to tell us what the technique is that is used in the hook that is shared there. And
okay,
yeah.
So here's the first one, okay? So did you know that the field of psychology is simply the brain trying to comprehend itself? Now, what do you think it is? We have the 4 listed at the top. You can feel free to type in the chat, right? And then Isaiah and Tom are on standby. They'll let us know. But is it an interesting observation, a story, a question, or an amazing fact? Or is it a combination of these?
Well, we've got a question by a couple folks. I would say it's an amazing fact.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's a combination here, question and a fact, right?
Right.
Good.
Yeah, and that's one thing that Professor Bullock mentioned. So if you can combine 2 of the techniques, you get an even more powerful hook. You can combine an amazing fact, but turn it into a question, or some of the other ones, as you'll see, you get an even more impactful hook.
And sometimes
so Reagan gets the prize, amazing fact as question.
Excellent. So Reagan, you get the virtual chocolate. We're giving you the virtual chocolate. Very good.
Very good. So what about this one, Professor?
The next one, sure. So imagine a big explosion as you climb through 3,000 feet. Imagine a plane full of smoke. Imagine an engine going clack, clack, clack. I know it sounds scary. Well, I had a unique seat that day. I was in seat 1D. Okay, and this is, we didn't make this up. This is actually from a TED Talk called 3 Things I Learned While My Plane Crashed.
So we have observation, story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So this is certainly a story, right? So this is a unique scenario, and notice how it's not the whole story. All you have to do with this type of hook is tell the beginning of a story, and then you go into your presentation, and the audience will be right there with you. Okay.
And this came from, yeah, so the airplane that left LaGuardia Airport and made the emergency landing in the Hudson River. Okay. So this next one right here, even if they've never been able to see it themselves, blind people smile when they're happy. Smiling is a basic human instinct. So what do you think? Out of the 4 presentation hooks, is it one or is it a combination of them?
So we've got amazing fact, two amazing facts. I might say interesting observation for my 2 cents on that.
Good. So yeah, it would be a combination, right? Because smiling as a basic human instinct might be proven, right? So blind people smile when they're happy. So I mean, it could be a combination. It's debatable, right? So one way or the other. Good.
Yeah, it's a fact is an observation.
Right.
Go. There we go. So everybody wins.
Like that.
It's one of my favorite ones. It's true. I mean, this is a fact. So that this is innate. We have, this is a universal human expression. This is something that we're taught. Very good. And then so the next one here, we've got sadly, and then this is from another TED Talk. Sadly, the next 18 minutes during this chat, 4 Americans that are alive will be dead from the food that they eat. Quite disturbing. This is from a TED Talk called Teach Every Child About Food. So it's about the importance of food education.
The consensus seems to be amazing fact.
Amazing fact. Maybe not amazing, but yes, I know that's our title, but this one might be disturbing, but yes, it is an amazing fact and it's an observation, right? So this one has both combined. Very good. And then Professor Bullock.
So last but not least, so 49% of social media users share product information with the hopes of improving the lives of others. So what do we think?
Fact, comma, observation.
Fact, comma, observation. So this is probably going to err more towards a fact. We have 49% of social media users. It's probably based off of some sort of data, right? And I guess you could debate, right? Like that, the hopes of improving lives of others, right? So maybe there's some attitudinal data there that we're trying to glean, right? So maybe there's some observation within that as well. But the idea is that you want to try to be thinking about these 4 presentation hooks. Quotes can be used, but just remember, you have to connect it to whatever it is that you're talking about. Okay, so.
Okay.
Dr. Sanchez.
Great. So now we're going to go back to cognitive science a bit and cognitive psychology to be more specific. And this comes from cognitive psychologist Jean Piaget. So she coined the term, schemata. Okay. So schemata, what is schemata? This is essentially a cognitive framework that allows us to interpret information. It's a blueprint. And to illustrate this, we're going to ask a question, and we hope that as many of you as you can type in the chat very quickly here. So if I were to tell you that I purchased a chair, right? I purchased a chair yesterday. Now I want you to think about the chair, right? And I want you to please type in the chat and tell us what color the chair was that you pictured, what it was made of, if you can describe anything about it. When I told you that sentence, I purchased a chair. What was the chair that you pictured? What was the color? How would you describe it? What was it made of? Just very briefly, just to hear from a few people. And Tom as well, if you can.
Somebody says a gray computer chair. I pictured a wooden chair with like a hard back on it with a nice dark stain.
Mm-hmm.
Anna says an ergonomic computer chair with a mesh seat back in black, always black.
Excellent.
Something from IKEA, so you'll have it together by Christmas. Daniel says an oak kitchen chair. Linda says a white tulip chair, plastic.
Oh.
And Shannon says a wooden brown chair. Yeah, Shannon and I, we are in sync.
Wow, excellent. Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, so we have wooden chair, we have IKEA chair, we have the white tulip chair, which I haven't heard of. I'm gonna have to look that up. Very interesting. And then we have the ergonomics or the office chair. So this is the wonder of communication, right? So all of us have a schemata, a blueprint for chair, and this allowed the communication to be successful. So with the sentence that was given, there wasn't a lot of details given. All of us filled in the gaps. And the chairs that we saw were based on maybe cultural experiences, our own personal experiences, our own preferences. So the idea is when you're presenting to a multicultural audience, you want to activate the schemata, and to do this effectively, the strategy is to present information through more than one sense. So the audience doesn't just see it and hear it, but you're activating all the senses, taste, touch, right? And the way to do this is, for example, let's say we're doing a presentation on entrepreneurship. Then you may have, and this is a term that culturally and linguistically is not universal across audiences around the world. But if you have the title of the presentation, Entrepreneurship in the Age of Globalization, and you have a picture of Jeff Bezos or Amancio Ortega on the slide. As soon as the audience members walk into the room, they're immediately able to make cognitive connections and connect pre-existing information with the new information that you're giving them. And they're able to integrate that new information more effectively. So the idea is that the more you present information through the senses, the more you activate the schemata and prime the audience for new information, both linguistically and then in terms of the knowledge as well. And you can do this through visual aids, sound files, videos, demonstrative stories, props, any hands-on activities, or any sensory ways of building the content of the presentation, okay? So now we're gonna go into not a one-size-fits-all template for the speech, but a model that is a singular model for any global presentation. And Professor Bullock is going to kick this off for us.
Sure. So we're going to talk about this upper half of this hourglass presentation structure. Now, the idea with this hourglass structure is that we're combining both high context cultures in terms of the way that information tends to be perceived or are received, as well as low context cultures and how the preferences for information to be received, okay? So it combines larger cultural style patterns and learning styles, okay? So if we just look at this top portion, we have this inverted cone, right? So this serves as the introduction. If we think of a presentation, there's an introduction, body, and a conclusion, just like there would be with a paper, right? But the idea is in the introduction, we lead with a hook, which makes sense. We have a main message there. The reason for that is because sometimes we're presenting in boardrooms where perhaps there's going to be a kind of a large grouping, diverse audiences of maybe different ranking, perhaps officials. There could be some interns in there as well. There could be some, just a mix of people, right? So we want to give the information at the very beginning, right? And then Professor Sanchez will talk about on how that segues out into the upright cone. But the idea is that there's an effective opening. There's something called rhetorical appeals, right? So rhetorical appeals here as well. There's also a thesis message, okay, that's integrated here as well. The idea is to capture the interest from the very beginning, okay? And then Professor Sanchez, so the whole idea is to distill information, right? Reflect this high context communication style. Now, high context cultures tend to operate at about 70% of the world's cultures operate in high context cultures. Now, what this means is that a lot of the information tends to be implicit, not direct, indirect, right? Just because of the collectivist nature of cultures. Now, the idea is that, so this would range for some, we'll give you some of the regions in a moment because it's on another slide. But the idea is that this inverted code reflects this deductive thinking and learning style. Okay, so deducing information. Elements are sequenced from general to specific typically, right? So going generally and then starting generally, then going into something more specific. And then we go to the bottom half, and Professor Sanchez?
Sure, and so we presented, so on the left side, that's more Eastern culture preferences. On the right side, this tends to be a pattern of Western culture, so the upright pyramid format. So the main message or point is introduced at the outset, right? And then you build towards a larger conclusion. And the focus here is on developing content and knowledge from one statement or principle or source. And this sequence is specific to general, right? And also this reflects inductive learning styles as well. So the idea here is that with this model, you are accommodating both high context and low context cultural communication styles. You're also accommodating different learning style preferences, deductive and inductive reasoning preferences or thinking in one single canvas, for example. So in this canvas, we also touch on in our book, and there's a lot more information there if you're interested, but this is essentially the framework. This canvas allows you to have sort of a one-size-fits-all model when you are preparing the presentation material. So now we want to get to something a little bit more profound before we go to our conclusion here, and we want to hear your questions. So there is one of the most influential photographs ever taken, right, is Earthrise. Okay, I'm sure here in this audience, because my father works for the government as well. He's in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This is a photograph that he has put in the study of our home, okay? And so why is this the most influential photograph ever taken? So this was taken by William Anders, the Apollo 8 mission, and it was a moment when the astronauts were turning around to look at the Earth on their way to the moon. And the quote from him is, "We set out to explore the moon, but instead we discovered the Earth." And this photograph gave us for the very first time This was flooded by international media across the planet. It went as viral as an image could at the time. It's said to have been so powerful it launched the environmental movement. And the reason for this is that it brought to us our first glimpse of the fragility and the loneliness and the beauty of our world, right? The first time that we had really seen this. And so it gave us on the planet this cognitive shift. And so the idea is that we want to do this in our work with others and our collaboration with others. We want to bring ourselves to that singular state of awareness and think about patterns of communication. So what we're going to do now is share with you the 3 larger patterns of communication. And this is based on, our model builds on research from linguist Richard Lewis and intercultural researcher Edward T. Hall. And so their work and ours, they identified these larger patterns and we're applying them to the presentation context with some added dimensions here. And so Professor Bullock, do you want to start with the first one?
Sure. So the first one is this linear expressive style pattern. What does this consist of? Well, it's this style pattern where there's going to be some individuals within your audience that are going to be more focused on the task, right? Being more direct with information and having the information presented in a logical format, right? The presentation goal, we have to frame it as this, is information. So we're there to get information, right? The presentation tip that we want to leave you with is to correlate words and actions, right? Focus on the facts if you're trying to reach this communication style, right? Provide logical solutions in order to satisfy and appease this audience member. Okay.
And geographically, this tends to be preferred by most English-speaking parts of the world, the United States, parts of Northwestern and North Central Europe, Scandinavia, Australia, and New Zealand. So this is about 30% of the world, okay? The next pattern here is the multi-expressive style pattern. So if you haven't guessed it, from all of my gestures and my actions and my dynamic here, this tends to be my cultural preference. This style tends to be people-oriented and expressive. The goal of presentations is personal connection and opinion. And to integrate this style in your presentations, you want to create a space for empathy, focus on feelings and inspirational creative solutions. And this style is a little bit less direct than the linear, but more direct than the one that we're about to tell you after. And then Professor Bullock. Sure.
And then like I was mentioning earlier, so this is indicative of high context culture. So this is a large majority of South America, MENA, Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, parts of Asia, as well as Oceania to some degree as well, not including Australia and New Zealand. And you'll understand that in a moment on why we say that here as well. And this operates in terms of 70% of the cultures across the world. Okay. The last one, Professor Sanchez.
Sure, and this is an amicable expressive. This style tends to be indirect, respect-oriented. The goal of presentations and communications is harmony. And so to integrate this style in your presentations, cultivate respect, relationships, think about courtesy, and then build constructive solutions that preserve reputation and social harmony. Okay. And Professor Bullock.
And this tends to be so Far Eastern cultures. So cultures such as Japan, Korea, China, right? Just because it's more about preserving respect, like Professor Sanchez said, as well as a couple other components. And this leads us into Professor Sanchez.
Sure, and to our final point here. So the idea is, again, so we're not trying to think of when I go to one particular country, this is my presentation approach. We live in a globalized era. We have mixed audiences in the same presentation space. So what you want to do is integrate all of these preferences into one singular style, which is an international presentation style. So how do you do that? There was a very smart man, Aristotle, who came up with a framework a long time ago. He was a master rhetorician. But in fact, this framework isn't a very clear and simple way to integrate these styles into one presentation approach. So logos, if you integrate appeals to logic, you include statistics, facts, relevant research, you're going to integrate the linear expressive pattern. Pathos is appeal to emotion. If you interweave emotionally impactful stories, compelling opinions, sensory media, you're going to integrate the multi-expressive. And then ethos appeals to credibility. If you include relevant information about your character, your reputation, your credibility, this will integrate the amicable expressive. So the goal is when you integrate all 3 of those appeals, then you start to develop the international presentation style. And the goal is, again, not to just focus on one approach for one particular country, but integrating these all into one singular style. And this also works in terms of professions, right? So, different professions may have different preferences, right? For example, doctors might be amicable expressive, publicists might be multi-expressive, and then accountants could be linear expressive. So this approach also accommodates individual diversity and cultural diversity at the same time, okay? So now we're gonna end with some linguistics here. Oh, go ahead, Professor.
And also just to indicate that these patterns do not mean that everyone from one culture is going to operate like this. That's not what we're saying here. Is it's rather that these are conventions that have continued to evolve over time, right? So that's why we're using the word, it tends to happen like this, right? But the idea is that we're not in any way, shape, or form saying that all cultures are going to operate exactly like this, okay?
Right.
Okay, and we're gonna skip this due to time.
Yeah.
And then,
yes.
Professor
Bullock, do you want to?
So just really quick, because I know we're short on time, is global English. We mentioned this briefly. This refers to English usage that a professional speaker or writer has optimized for global audience. We want you to know that this is the International Business Communication Standard. Many of us might be familiar with this, right? Or maybe we've heard of it, but we didn't really know what it was called or how it's used. But just even think about the International Space Station, right? As Professor Sanchez talks through this, that there has to be communication, and it needs to be effective, right? Otherwise, a lot of catastrophes could happen, right? Orbiting up there in space, okay? So what is global English? It's clear and concise usage that does not assume native fluency of others, including cultural etiquette, though. But it's a better way to think about it is the way that Professor Sanchez is going to describe.
Right. So sometimes the easiest way to think of global English is thinking about what is not global English. So things that are not a global English are idioms, right? So these are phrases or groups of words that have a cultural meaning separate from the literal meaning of the individual parts. Things like cut and dry, off the top of my head, go the extra mile. These are not universal when they're translated linguistically. So this is not global English. Culture references, Americans love our references to baseball. We say level the playing field, let's bring our A game, that came out of left field, okay? Whenever we're using a cultural expression, we want to make sure that that expression is globally relatable and comprehensible, right? The next are initialisms and acronyms. In the government, we tend to have a lot of these abbreviations. So initialisms are where the separate pronunciation of each letter is used for the abbreviation, like FBI. Acronyms are when there's a word formed from the initials of the abbreviation, like NATO, for example. But a string of these can be quite challenging to an international audience, so we want to be aware of that. Business isms. So this is corporate jargon, like lots of moving parts. Let's put out some feelers. Let's get ahead of the curve. This is also that baseball reference. Want to make sure to limit those. And instead of saying, let's draw up. Oh, I'm sorry. No, this is my next example. The next one is phrasal verbs. These are idiomatic phrases that are used that function as a verb, but they're 2 words or 3 words. For example, draw up the contract. Instead of using a phrasal verb, say draft the contract, write the contract, use a singular verb instead of a phrasal verb. And the last one is sarcasm. This is saying the opposite of what you mean. This can also cause some challenges in the communication. If you say, beautiful day, isn't it? And in fact, it's raining outside. Or if you say, well, that's just what we need, and it's the opposite, this can cause some communication challenges. So instead, it's recommended to use the language of empathy, pronouns such as we and us, including the audience in the goals that are being discussed and the solutions. And as Professor Bullock mentioned, this is something that is being used at the United Nations at all levels of government. Global English is now very important, but not focused on simplifying the language, but clarity. And we wanted to end here with a painting that my twin brother painted. He is the illustrator of our book. He's an award-winning illustrator, and this piece we feel has fully captured the message here that is the larger framework of these types of presentation skills and the international presentation style, that we are going for a human perspective, and that as a presenter, you are sort of the conductor of an orchestra. And what you're doing is bringing those audiences' visions towards one ultimate goal, harmony, being a global communicator, thinking about a world that is more connected through these patterns of communication than we may initially believe. And we wanted to share with you, if you want to take an international presentation style quiz, we have one on our website. that is free, and we will give you results, give you an analysis based on your answering a few questions to tell you which style you're leaning towards in those 3 patterns and which one, how you can integrate the other 2 into your style. And also, as another bonus, we want to share this with you, that our publisher is giving this painting away for free if you pre-order the book. And so that's something that, if you're interested, that's a gift that is also happening right now. We're very thankful for your time. And this is our information if you want to get in touch with us. We probably have 1 minute, but we can stay. But I know that the conference is timed for questions, any comments you may have. And I will put in the culture quiz link in the chat, and then the book if you're interested. And Professor Bullock, do you have anything you want to add?
Thanks. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks to Tom, and thanks to Isaiah for helping to facilitate this. And thanks to NAGC for putting this together. We hope that you enjoyed it. Again, there's just so much to say, and if we had more time, we could definitely dive into it. But we really appreciate your time. We hope you find the information useful. Just think about it the next time that you're giving a presentation, that it's more likely going to a diverse audience, and try to apply some of these effective openings, the hourglass structure, whenever you can. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. And the website there, Globally Communicate, that has everything. So if you go there, you can get in touch with us. There's resources. The tips are there. I think we have an article you can download. There's a lot of information there that you can, that you're free to use. And also you can get in touch with us through the emails there. Yeah, sorry, Tom.
No, that's all right, gentlemen. This wasn't what I was really thinking it was going to be at all, but it's so incredible. We just really appreciate you sharing your hearts. There's such a connection between the work that we do and how now we can be better prepared to share that more globally. So really well done. Greatly appreciate it. Now, thanks for taking the time, and thanks for attending this conference. I've put the links in the Whova chat. You can also look for this presentation to be uploaded there. And we just want to really appreciate your attendance and hope that you're getting a lot out of the communication school. Have a great day, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tom.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.